If you're not up to speed on the latest trends, and I have the utmost respect for you if you aren't, here's one that's been making the rounds. Arguing about what the quote-unquote 4 major American cities are. To be honest, I think stuff like this is gimmicky, it's engagement bait, and I usually don't engage. But today I'm actually going to tackle the question and do the thing I usually do, which is try to come up with some reasonable criteria to help answer the question. And the reason I say it's engagement bait is there are 3 cities that just about everyone is going to agree on. New York, Chicago, and LA. I mean, New York is 100%, and then I feel like if you leave Chicago or LA off the list, you're just being a hater. And I hope as we walk through the criteria I came up with for this, you'll understand why. Asking for a 4th one is really only intended to start arguments. Now, what I'll usually do at this point in the video is summarize all the criteria I looked at and then rank cities. But today I'm going to do it a little differently. I've got a lot of different criteria, really different ways of looking at this question. So I'm going to walk through each, talk about why it matters, and tell you how that particular criterion makes the case for different candidates. So as we go through and you start to see the same cities mentioned again and again, you'll start getting a sense of where all this is headed. And then at the end, I'll try to make a definitive statement about the 4 cities, but fair warning, it's just not that straightforward. Okay, let's go through all the criteria I looked at. 1, population, and I wanted to look at this a few different ways. The most obvious thing is city population. The 3 most populous US cities are New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, and those have been the top 3, I think, for my entire lifetime. Number 4 these days, Houston, Texas, so based on city population alone, you've got a good argument for Houston. But if you watch this channel, you know I think city jurisdictional boundaries are a little arbitrary, and I usually like to look at metro areas. So in terms of metropolitan statistical area population, you've got the same top 3, but Dallas-Fort Worth slots in at number 4, so this is really the argument for Dallas. And the other one I wanted to look at is combined statistical area, or CSA, which is a broader measure of urban agglomeration. So CSA will combine separate metro areas that have strong economic and commuting ties, like San Francisco and San Jose, Boston and Providence, and DC and Baltimore. So by this measure, DC/Baltimore actually slots in just ahead of Chicago at number 3. So this is an argument for DC as a candidate for the 4th major city, but recognize that New York, LA, and Chicago are all in the top 4, no matter how you slice population. Now, for me, there's more to being a major city than just population in the aggregate. Density is important too because it indicates a place where people are willing to live in close quarters together to be part of the city's urban life. Measuring density is tricky. I did go ahead and rank the candidate cities by population density, and the top 4 are New York, San Francisco, Boston, and Miami. But also, I'd refer you to this video where I tackled the issue of how to best measure density. I went with maximum population you could fit within a 3-kilometer radius circle, and the top 4 cities by that measure were New York by a mile, then LA, San Francisco, and Boston. Population is the obvious one. Here's another one I like, gross domestic product. This is going to be by metro area for the most recent year, and I think this one's a strong indicator of how important a region is to the US economy as a whole. New York, LA, and Chicago all in the top 4, but the number 3 region is the Bay Area, one of just 3 metro areas that do over $1 trillion in GDP annually. So chalk another one up for San Francisco. Another category you might think about is cultural contributions. This is just extremely subjective. I tried doing a video at one point about the cities that have contributed the most to popular music since the beginning of the rock and roll era, and I did the best I could, but it was really impossible to measure objectively. So I'm going to leave this one out, but I do think you can make the cultural argument for just about any of the candidate cities we're looking at today. Okay, here's a criterion that I think is very relevant for measuring the majorness of US cities, but I might not apply it to any other country. and that's Skyline. When I think of a major city, I think of a forest of skyscrapers. So the criterion is number of buildings over 500 feet tall. New York is the easy number 1 here, and Chicago is the clear number 2. By the way, just got back from Chicago, so you will be getting a video soon, but man, I'm still trying to process the whole experience. Number 3 and 4 on the Skyline list are interesting. Miami, which I wouldn't have guessed until I looked it up, even though I spent a few days there in 2023. And Houston, which also got the city visit treatment in 2023, so second mention for Houston on this list. By the way, the top 10 in this category, basically 9 good candidates for the 4 major cities, and Jersey City, which I think is just interesting. Next up, sports, and the question is a city or region represented in every major sports league? And I'm using a pretty broad definition here with all 5 of what I consider the major men's professional leagues and the 2 women's professional leagues. And to me, this is a very intuitive definition of major. If you were forming a top-flight professional sports league, which cities absolutely have to be represented in order for your league to be taken seriously? So New York, LA, and Chicago all have teams in each of the 7 leagues I'm looking at, and oftentimes multiple teams in each, which I think is another definition of major city. At one point in US history, Boston, Philadelphia, and St. Louis all had 2 Major League Baseball teams. And if you were doing this whole exercise in, say, 1925, those 3 cities would all be contenders for today's list, in addition to Chicago and New York. So the only other city that clearly has a team in each of the 7 major professional leagues is DC, but I would also make an argument for San Francisco. Now you could say, well, the Sharks and the Quakes are San Jose teams, and that's not the same as San Francisco. But I always come back to the fact that the Bay Area's NFL team is called San Francisco, but plays in the San Jose metro area. Also, as recently as a couple years ago, the Bay Area had 2 NFL teams and 2 MLB teams, and I think the only reason they still don't is because the Bay Area is less amenable to spending public money on new stadiums for billionaire owners than other cities are. So I might give DC a tiny edge as the 4th city in this category, but it's a pretty close call. Okay, let's talk about transit, and not just because I personally think transit is cool and important, but because I really think that high-capacity transit is what makes a major city a major city. You can't have the density and the economic activity and the intermingling of cultures that makes cities great without having an efficient means of moving people around. And for me, this is all about heavy rail, subways or elevateds that operate on a grade-separated system. So I looked at this a couple ways. In terms of miles of heavy rail network, New York is the runaway number 1, Chicago is 4th, and this is not a strong category for LA, which is way down at number 9. Numbers 2 and 3? Well, now you might start feeling like we're converging on an answer to this whole thing because it's DC and San Francisco. I did want to look at heavy rail ridership too, and for that you get a different answer. Still New York and Chicago in the top 4. DC is still number 2, Chicago moves up to 3rd, and then number 4 is Boston, which I guess could be an argument for Boston being the 4th major city, but it's still behind DC. Here's another thing that I think is an indicator of city majorness. If it has multiple useful airports, and I define this as FAA designated large or medium hubs, there are really 5 cities that I would consider as having 3 or more. LA and New York, not Chicago, but the Bay Area has 3, DC has 3, I think you have to count BWI because it actually has Washington in the name, and then Miami. Keep in mind, for each of those, I'm counting 1 airport that's outside the metro area, but inside the CSA, including BWI. The other thing I'd consider is combined passenger count at a city's airports, or enplanements, as they say in the biz. This one's a little weird since it includes transfers, but I think it's still a measure of how large a city looms in the national imagination. So for the top 4, you're going to get New York and LA at 1 and 4, but at 2 and 3, you're going to get Atlanta and Dallas, which I think are reasonable candidates for the Mount Rushmore of US cities. Another thing that I think makes a city a major city, like if you go anywhere else in the world, it doesn't have name recognition. For example, when I travel to another part of the globe, I've given up on telling people I'm from Portland, even though that's generally been home base for the last 20 odd years. It just doesn't register. So I tell them Seattle because they've usually heard of it. Although when I was in Australia earlier this year, I told people I was Canadian because I just didn't want to get into it. Anyway, my measure for this one is cities that get the most international visitors. And for this, New York is 1 and LA is 3, but Miami slots in at 2. And number 4 is Orlando, so at this point, you can see there's definitely an argument for Miami. Okay, those are all my criteria. You might have others, but it's my list. You're just gonna have to deal with it. Before we get to the final verdict, customary reminder to click on the various screen elements as you see fit. All the ways to connect on various websites. I tend to post a lot from the cities I'm visiting on Instagram. Chicago last week, San Diego next week, and Patreon to get early access to whatever in-person events come up next. Nothing on the docket yet for 2026, but that'll change soon. Okay, so I allocated points for each category of stuff I looked at and totaled it all up so I could rank each city's majorness. Here are the also-rans in top 10 format. 10, actually a dead heat between Atlanta and Houston. 9, Dallas. 8, Philadelphia, which didn't rank in the top 4 in any individual criterion, but was in the top 10 on just about everything. 7 is Boston, and 6 is Miami. New York, LA, and Chicago are 1, 2, and 3, of course, and there isn't that much daylight between LA and Chicago, so by my reckoning, there are really 2 candidates for that 4th spot. Here's the case for DC. 3rd largest combined statistical area in the US and 3 major airports. The caveat on both of those is you're really giving DC credit for the features of Baltimore, which is a great city in its own right. DC does legitimately have franchises in every major pro sports league though, and it's really the only city that can claim that outside the big 3. Also, the number 2 heavy rail metro system in the US, however you measure it. Where DC really falls down is Skyline, which is maybe a bit unfair because of the Height of Buildings Act of 1910, which is related to the fact that it is the nation's capital, something I didn't give extra credit for at all. Honestly, probably a negative in 2025. And here's the case for San Francisco. 3rd highest metro area GDP ahead of Chicago. Also has teams in all 7 major pro sports leagues, but you do have to include the San Jose teams to get there, which I do since one of those teams is literally called the San Francisco 49ers. The core city of the nation's 3rd largest grade-separated metro system by network miles, and it's a top 3 city by just about any density metric you use. So in the final tally, I have San Francisco getting the nod just ahead of DC, but a lot of this comes down to how you think about metropolitan regions and how much the attributes of those regions you want to credit to any one individual city. The Bay Area is more polycentric than just about any other urban region in the US. But that's how I think through all this. If you personally don't think a skyline or density are that important, then maybe you favor DC. But I personally couldn't make an argument for any city outside of those 2. I think the real answer is there isn't a Rushmore. In my mind, the US either has 1 major city, or 3, or 5, and asking people to name 4 is just being argumentative. Which I guess is how you get clicks, so if you clicked on this video, then congratulations, you're part of the problem. And I didn't dig a whole lot into what puts Chicago and LA a tier above San Francisco and DC, but you will get all kinds of Chicago content in the next video I'm working on. And LA, kind of self-explanatory, but I'll definitely be getting down there again next year. There's no doubt that when it comes to being a dominant global force, one of America's greatest assets has been the soft power that comes from Hollywood and the film industry. But increasingly, it seems that soft power is dissipating, and I definitely got that feeling watching a recent video essay from Lindsay Ellis called "Let's Compare and Contrast Disney's Flop Eras." If you're not familiar with Lindsay's stuff, her voice and her point of view are unique in the best possible way. She's hilarious and insightful, and in charting the rise and fall of Disney through multiple flop eras and resurgences, including the current era of live-action remakes and sequels that seem to be getting worse and worse, you can feel genuine human appreciation for what Disney does well. I do love a good video essay that's written and narrated by a human. They seem to be harder and harder to come by these days, but luckily, Lindsay Ellis exists, and Let's Compare and Contrast Disney's Flop Eras is a Nebula original and exclusive to the platform. I increasingly find myself logging onto Nebula first when I'm looking for good human-created content, and the platform is home to lots of great city planning, architecture, and engineering-related content. But I love film and culture commentary too, and Nebula has a deep catalog from the best creators in that space as well. So on Nebula, you can definitely find big, ambitious, highly entertaining projects like the new season of Jetlag, which is phenomenal. But there's also a great roster of smaller creators that work in niche topic areas you love, like cities and transportation. So being part of Nebula has been huge in growing my channel and connecting with new audiences, and when you subscribe, it really helps support what I do. But signing up isn't just a great way to invest in the creators you enjoy, it's also an investment in continuing to make the Nebula streaming experience itself better and better. Because yes, Nebula is kind of like Netflix for people who are a little too into trains, but on a deeper level, it's a home base for content that's a little more thoughtful, that's created by humans, for humans, which I think is more important than ever. And there's a pretty big idea behind all of it, raising the level of the entire platform and growing it into a prestige streaming service. So if you use my custom link down in the description or the QR code right here on screen, you're gonna get the best deal. All the Nebula content for 40% off the regular price when you sign up for an annual subscription, or even better, a lifetime subscription. Regular price for lifetime is now $500, but with my creator link, it's just $300. You pay once, and you get Nebula for as long as both you and Nebula exist. Nebula subscribers also get guest passes, one every month or 3 per quarter if you're on the annual or lifetime. Once active, guests can binge all the Nebula content they want for a week and no payment info is required. Signing up for Nebula really is a fantastic way to demonstrate your support for a one-of-a-kind creator-owned platform and to fund the continued production of amazing originals, and there's great new stuff hitting the platform all the time. So my recommendation, use my custom link or the QR code right here to get Nebula for 40% off. That's just $300 for the lifetime deal. It's nebula.tv/CityNerd, and then go watch Lindsay Ellis on Disney's Flop Eras right now. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support, which really helps smooth things out so that I don't have to go back and apply for like consulting jobs ever again. I honestly think we're much better off if I don't do that. Anyway, keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with plenty of Chicago content in a couple weeks, and I'll see you then.